Alright everyone, it's time for a video with an upfront warning to take polls with a grain of salt, but if this is even close to true, yeah, that would really sting for Joe Biden and the Democrats. According to a couple of admittedly very limited polls, so we're talking a few hundred people as the sample size, according to those, again, speculative polls, grain of salt mode, Donald Trump may be tied with Joe Biden among immigrant voters. That is, voters that originated in another country and gained citizenship so that now they can vote. I would suspect that this is probably close to true. I've spoken with people who are first-gen immigrants. Of course, one of the perks of my particular job as a content creator, I get to talk to people from all around the world and people who've come from all around the world. And I don't see any real support for Joe Biden. Mostly it seems to be white college liberals more than any other single group, and most of them have cringe avatars and a bunch of crazy shit on Twitter, and that's basically their hive, their drone nest. That's the only support that I'm really seeing. As far as like hard support for Biden, it's the white NIMBYist liberals from the middle and upper middle class. So the gated community dwellers and people from the burbs. That's where the support is. There's certainly plenty of soft support for Joe Biden. Part of it is I hate Trump and therefore Biden, acceptable. Part of it is people are like, well, I just like, I don't necessarily hate anyone, but I've got a D after my name. I'm a partisan Democrat. I'm not really enthused about Biden, but I'll support him begrudgingly. By the way, those people don't turn out at really high levels at the polls during elections, so we're having a broad, soft support plethora, not necessarily the best way going forward. It's much better to have a smaller number of people in your core, but that core is much more hardened, because they'll actually go out and vote. If anything, they at least even each other out. If Donald Trump indeed is tied among immigrant voters, I have a sneaking suspicion. They don't list the ethnicity of these immigrants. I have a suspicion that it's immigrants from certain South Asian regions. For instance, the most wealthy group of Americans by ethnic breakdown is Indian Americans. Well, if you've got a block of people who, by and large, are making it, probably they're not going to vote for Joe Biden's policies. They probably don't want more inflation and more migration. Another group would be Hispanics. The Democrats have persisted for too long in trying to make the case that a third-generation or a legal immigrant, in any case, even a first-gen legal immigrant, they paid for the lawyer, they did the paperwork, they submitted their info, they waited, and then they waited some more. They went through the shit process that is the U.S. immigration system for legal immigrants. The Democrats want them to throw in with somebody who broke the law, crossed the border, and then got free housing and health care. So the person who worked hard and worked their way up, or maybe their parents came over and they worked their ass off, they put their kid through college, now their kid's got a PhD. That kid, by virtue of ethnicity alone, that PhD, who happens to have Mexican parents, is supposed to somehow throw in, for some strange reason, with somebody who's perpetually on welfare and not even legally in the country. Effectively, you're insulting them. Now, the Democrats could get away with that when it was mainly people who were first-gen, because everyone was still struggling. That particular voting bloc struggled, generally. But now a lot of them have really made it in life. They're no longer struggling. They want to be middle-class suburbanites, too. They have more in common with the next neighborhood over that's majority white than they do the barrio over there a few miles away, where people are working under the table 60 hours a week just to put cornmeal on the table. And that's just the long and short of it. The Democrats, though, have been oblivious to this for some time. This is why they're losing that voting bloc. Another voting bloc, ironically enough, black voters. Black immigrants, specifically. So first gen, they came from Ghana or something like that. Now, why would they support Trump over Joe Biden? Well, again, there's the problem that a lot of those voters live in urban areas. What's happening in urban areas right now? They're being pumped full of illegal immigrants and asylum seekers, who inevitably form a sub-ethnic bloc. This is what happens in urban areas especially. If you look at the demographic data in the U.S. cities, they are stringently segregated. Much, much more than any small town. People always have this weird fixation on, well, those small town rubes and farmers out there, they discriminate and they love segregation. They lock up their doors. Usually they don't lock their doors, but then the black family moved in and they did. No. It's the cities that are segregated. Look at the goddamn demographic details if you don't believe me. So you're going to end up with an expansive Hispanic community here. There will be crime associated with it. Oftentimes, street gangs are ethnically or racially related. And then you've got the black neighborhood right next door, and all of a sudden you've got more gang shootings and more break-ins and more poverty because, people might lash out at the neighboring ethnicity because of the segregated nature of U.S. cities. And it's like one block is 100% black and then the next block is 100%, East Asian or something. And then they resent that. Again, while the Democrats are feeding them the same welfare breadcrumbs they have since the 1970s, which has not alleviated poverty in any U.S. city. Their policies simply don't work. Whether you want more welfare or simply to pay less taxes and make more wealth on your own, there's no reason to vote for the Democratic Party at all. It's not helping anyone. The poor, the wealthy, unless you're super rich, then you're doing fine right now. Inflation is really increasing the standard of wealth for multi-billionaires. They're doing just fine, don't worry about them. They're billionaires. Even if you had hyperinflation, I'm sure they would still have bread on the table. Although we are probably headed for another 20s-style crash, so eventually the music will stop. You can only pump the economy for so long before you've inflated it to the point of no return. But Bidenomics hasn't worked. The border policy hasn't worked. The crime policy is not working. I'm not surprised if Trump is roughly tied among immigrant voters. Again, especially the rise in Hispanic voters with a right-wing mentality, which is something that I was called crazy for foretelling along with other commentators. We were called cucks by the old alt-right, half a decade ago. Supposedly, Texas should be solid blue right now, and the voting bloc should have remained utterly homogenous in its tendencies, but that's not what happened. And that's while the Republican Party moved further into populism and further away from the neocon trash of the past. It's almost like these two things are linked and the average American doesn't want neoliberalism anymore. They want to return to populist stability because things were actually stable under Donald Trump. By the way, if the GOP decides to cuck after Trump's gone after his likely second term, and they get a Bush candidate or something, things will go right back in the other direction. Well, the Democrats will curb stomp them. By the way, Mitch McConnell by then probably no longer leading the Senate GOP because he's on his last leg, thank goodness and good riddance. So yeah, interesting times are ahead. Grain of salt mode, 2 very small sample polls, but it's plausible. I'd like to see more polling on the issue, and I'd like to see an ethnic breakdown. Like, can we get something with a sample size that's bigger than 200? Because that's not necessarily going to cut it for me. I need a little bit more meat on them bones. That's about all. Peace out.